Hello, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. It is here. Six Nations Week 2023 is upon us. The start of the championship this weekend. I'm going to be at Twickenham for the England-Scotland game. Really looking forward to that one. But the build-up is going to crank up a notch this week. So my first video of the week, speaking about the Six Nations and speaking about England's latest injuries. The announcement was made last night. A couple of players come in, a couple of players have dropped out as well. So I'm just going to be looking at some of the options to England, taking those injuries into account, particularly the centres and the back row areas. I think probably the two most interesting areas of what Steve Borthwick could do selection-wise potentially. So I'm getting into that in this video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Like the video and drop a comment down below. Who would you like to see Steve Borthwick pick in the centres and in his back row? All right, let's get into it. So tomorrow, which is Tuesday, I'm going to pick what my England team would be to start that game against Scotland. So here I'm just kind of talking about some of the options, but tomorrow's video will be my kind of full 15, possibly 23, but definitely full 15 to start the Calcutta Cup against Scotland, which I think is quite an intriguing game, quite an interesting start for England. But in terms of the latest news, Sunday night, so Henry Slade and Courtney have been ruled out of that Six Nations opener against Scotland, so they're not available, but Anthony Watson and Jamie George have both been added to the squad. So both in the case of Henry Slade and Courtney it's obviously disappointing. It adds to England's injury concerns. Both guys are really experienced. Both guys, I think, have a huge amount of quality. I think both of them would probably have been involved in some capacity as well. With Courtney, I think, had he been available, he'd have probably been starting. And Henry Slade, I think, may well have been starting. Certainly could have been an option coming off the bench because he's relatively versatile as well. So, yeah, both players are a shame that they miss out. But when I look at the options, and I get into it in just a minute, I think it's quite exciting for England as well. I think it has the potential to see some other players in those jerseys, add some depth to the squad. So I'm quite excited about that going forward. In terms of Anthony Watson and Jamie George coming in, Anthony Watson has looked pretty sharp, really good since he's returned from injury for Leicester. It's just been a long time since Watson has really got any consistent game time, particularly in an England shirt. I know he's been injured for quite a while. Come back with Leicester, he looked pretty sharp in the Champions Cup. So whether he is part of the squad, the matchday squad, we'll wait and see. But we kind of know what he brings. And Jamie George, I actually think, is really, really important. I've done a video already on this channel about England's injury issues, particularly at hooker. Jamie George, all of a sudden, you're adding your most experienced hooker back into the mix for selection. So pleased to see him back. I want to start at the centres, though, in terms of looking at the Henry Slade injury, what it might mean for Steve Borthwick and what it might mean for what he does. Now, I'm going to presume here that Owen Farrell is going to be selected at fly half. I'm presuming that just because that seems to be most of the noises that are coming out at the moment. You haven't tended to get the impression, if you followed the coverage, that Marcus Smith and Owen Farrell as that 10-12 axis is going to be continued. I could well be wrong there, but that's just kind of my gut instinct at the moment. So presuming Owen Farrell plays at fly half, I mean, he's going to play, he's the captain. Who then can you pick in the centres? You've basically got options of Dan Kelly, Joe Marchant, Ollie Lawrence and Manu Tuilagi. Elliot Daly has been ruled out because of that hamstring injury that he picked up for Saracens. So within that, you've got, as I say, a number of really interesting options. Manu Tuilagi is obviously the experienced guy within there. He's the player that a lot of England fans for ages now have been hoping he could hit the heights that he has done previously. And he's struggled with injuries, he's struggled with form. There's also another section of England fans that kind of think England need to move on from Manu Tuilagi because of his injury issues. But he's in the squad. Ollie Lawrence is in there, been razor sharp for Bath since he joined them from Worcester. He is in that Manu Tuilagi mould in terms of a big, strong, quite a dynamic ball carrier. Got a really interesting comment actually on the channel a couple of days ago. Yeah, it was last week, I think, of a Worcester fan who said they've seen loads of Ollie Lawrence, and as good as he is with ball in hand, basically his catching, his passing, his defensive work isn't strong enough. I don't know if anyone else out there would back that up. I just thought that was quite an interesting perspective because Ollie Lawrence's stock at the moment is very, very high indeed. I think there's a lot of people that would be like to see him starting. Then you've got Joe Marchant as well, another guy who hasn't got heaps of England caps. He's been around the squad for quite a while. He's made the move. He's going to play his club rugby overseas from next year. But he's got an opportunity to come back in. And then Dan Kelly as well, the Leicester Tigers man, who has just a couple of caps to his name, I believe I'm right in saying. But he could come in as well. So you look at those options. Now, Manu Tuolangi and Dan Kelly, you'd say, are the 12s. And Joe Marchant and Ollie Lawrence are probably the 13s. I know we've seen Manu Tuolangi play 13 a lot for England, but that was kind of because Owen Farrell had been fitted into inside centre. Tuolangi has played inside centre for Sale all this year. That's where Dan Kelly plays. And Ollie Lawrence has been playing at 13, and Joe Marchant is kind of a 13 or a winger. So it depends where you want to go of those options, essentially. That's kind of the debate for Steve Borthwick. I'm probably not gonna, I'm gonna save it for tomorrow of exactly what I'd go for, because in all honesty, looking at those options, I'm not sure. I'm honestly not sure what I'd do. I struggle to not pick Manu Tuolangi. I think that's part of my problem, is that I am in that camp. I still have that shine of what he's done before for England. So I struggle not to pick Tuolangi at 12. But I completely understand the concerns that a lot of England fans have. And then do you go with Joe Marchant, a guy who's waited an awful long time to try and get a consistent opportunity, or Ollie Lawrence, whose form in the Gallagher Premiership probably warrants being called up? I think at this moment in time, I'd probably shift towards Ollie Lawrence. The point is, I think you've got 4 really good options there. And I think whatever Steve Borthwick goes for, it's quite an exciting centre combination. So I'm excited to see what he does there. Right, onto the back row. So Courtney Law's been ruled out of the Scotland game. I think there are concerns that he could miss the whole of the Six Nations now, which is obviously really disappointment. It adds to just a really bad time he's having with injuries, Courtney Law's. He missed all of the autumn. He hasn't played much for Northampton. He had a really bad concussion that it took him a long time to return from. So disappointed for him, but that is a possibility. But in terms of those back row options now, if we look at them, you've got Ben Curry, Alex Dombrant, Ben Earl, Lewis Ludlam, Sam Simmons, and Jack Willis. Now, presuming within that Dombrant and Sam Simmons are your number 8s, presuming you're not going to do a kind of let's shift a Ben Curry to 8 or a Ben Earl to 8 or anything like that. I guess it kind of depends what you're going for. Sam Simmons, obviously incredibly explosive, but I think if you do pick Simmons at 8, you need some bigger bodies, some more physical bodies at kind of 6 and 7, which could even mean that we see, a second row be shifted into the 6th position, something like that to accommodate it. I don't know. That could be an option. So yeah, Dombrant and Simmons, kind of different number 8s. Dombrant coming back in, kind of lost his place through the summer when Billy Vunipola played really well in Australia. Can he kind of retake it? Vunipola not part of the squad. But I think it's the flankers and the blind side and the open side are probably the more interesting picks here. Ben Curry, brilliant player. Hasn't featured a huge amount for England, particularly when you consider his brother Tom has gone on to become kind of a world star, but players in a similar mould, and not just because they're twins. In terms of physicality, he can hit breakdowns, very competitive. Ben Earl, reigning Premiership Player of the Year, so explosive but good over the breakdown as well. I think he adds a whole different dynamic to the England back row. Lewis Ludlam, I think that could be where England get some of their physicality actually. If you're missing a Courtney Lawes, I think Ludlam does give you that kind of physicality. It gives you a bit of ball carrying as well. I think maybe he could be a good option at 6. And then Jack Willis, one of the best players in the world over the breakdown, pinching penalties. He's had a tough old season with Wasps going into administration. He got injured, didn't he, in a Six Nations a couple of years ago, a really bad injury, which took him a long time to come back from. So again, I think similar to the centres in the back row, you have options there. You have really interesting combinations that you can pick depending on how you go. Again, I'm going to kind of keep my cards a little bit close to my chest because I want to digest it, have a look at it, and then pick my England squad tomorrow. But I definitely think I'd struggle not to pick Ben Earl given his form. And then that is probably going to have to shape the rest of your back row, really. But the point in this video, I think, is that Steve Borthwick does have options. Despite the injuries that England face, I think there's a chance for new players to come in. I think some interesting combinations, some form players that England fans have been crying out for a long time. It's exciting. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, what you make, particularly the centres and the back row. Do you agree with me? I think those are the most interesting selection decisions for Steve Borthwick personally. So do drop a comment, like the video, and subscribe to the channel. Loads of content through the Six Nations. Cannot wait for it. And I'll see you in the next one.